Hello, my name is Kimberly Weissel and I am Inc.'s editor-at-large. Thanks so much for joining us today for our live chat with Shama Hyder. She's the founder of digital marketing agency Marketing Zen. Shama is also one of Inc.'s recently announced 30 under 30 entrepreneurs, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Today we plan on discussing how Shama started and grew her company, and we also hope to get some of her social media advice for entrepreneurs, since social media and marketing are her specialty. Toward the end of our chat, we'll open up the floor to answer questions from readers. So don't forget to tweet us using the hashtag IncLiveChat. So without further ado, Shama, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So I wanted to ask you about how you got interested in social media, because when you first discovered it, this was not like a passing thing. This wasn't like, oh, Twitter, it's cool.
No, people didn't even know what Twitter was. It was so funny. Kimberly used to wear a t-shirt with a blue bird on it, you know, now, which we, of course, know as the Twitter icon. But when I wore it back then, like 07, 08, people would say, what cartoon is that? And like, and I have to explain what Twitter was, and I would get these like weird looks, like I didn't quite.
And this is when you're in college.
Yeah, so I have a graduate degree. I have a master's in organizational communication and technology, and I did my thesis on Twitter. So, and a lot of people, like a lot of students, get excited because they're like, "Oh, you wrote it in 140 characters." But I did not write it in 140 characters. For those out there who are like, "Score!" But it was about why people use social media. You know, why this sort of trend towards social networking, and I thought this is going to be so disruptive in the world of communication and digital media and technology.
What stage was Twitter at then?
Early, like a few thousand users at most, you know. So my username is @Shama, so you can guess.
Right. Exactly. You got in early. That's your username.
How early the days, and it was just everyone followed each other back. In fact, it was very common to set it up so you would auto follow each other back. And today that seems like, you know, it's such a bygone era almost. And this is before the revolution in Egypt and before Twitter really became sort of the platform for citizen journalism, you know, which we've seen in more recent years.
So did you expect then that your career would be something to do with social media?
No, you know, like most people, like most grad students or students graduating, I thought I'd get out and I'd get a job, you know, I'd get the years of experience in, and except the problem was, not only was it one of the worst recessions since the Great Depression, 07, 08, really kind of the markets had taken a hit, but also the industry didn't exist. So when I talked to people about social media or digital media, it was so foreign. It was still such a foreign concept. Facebook had just opened up like outside of colleges, you know, it had just been a few months that Facebook was now allowing users outside of universities to even set up an account.
Wow.
So it was really, really early days, but I knew that was, I guess in some ways it was one of the strengths I feel like I always had is to be able to see around the curve and kind of see here's what's next. In academia, I think you definitely have that advantage. So being able to see that, I was like, well, this is going to be huge. And even though corporations at that time didn't get it, I felt like it was worth the risk. You know, and really at 23, what did I have to lose? So I started my own company, and we never looked back. I mean, today we're up to 30 people, and we grew from being a social media consulting firm to today what we are, an integrated web marketing and digital PR firm.
So if corporations didn't get it, right, if you couldn't get a job as a social media strategist or a community editor, one of those titles that we're familiar with now, how could you sell them sort of the same service on a consulting basis?
It was so funny because while big corporations, a great question, so big corporations were scared, right? I mean, it's recession time, you buckle down, you don't spend anything that that you don't understand, you don't venture into new territory, but small businesses were eager. So our first customers were small businesses because they said, listen, if you can get customers through our door, we'll do it. Like, we're willing to try new things. So I think it's always been kind of that difference in tough times. Whenever a recession hits, is corporations sort of buckle down, pull back. For small businesses, I think you see more innovation.
Right, they're game. Right? They'll try it, right?
Exactly. And they were game. And so our first clients were a lot of small businesses. And today, I mean, we work with a lot of corporations, nonprofits across the board. But yeah, it was funny because my first clients were all really like small businesses.
So how did they find you, and how did you find them? Right, you're just out of school.
Yeah.
How did you market yourself?
So funny because, you know, I was reading all these books and trying to figure out like what's my network, right? And my network literally consisted of like my parents, my sister, my dog and cat. Like,
did they have social media accounts? Did you sign them up?
It was just so funny though because, you know, at 23, you did like right out of school, really no network, no connections. So honestly, I did what I was telling other people to do. We used inbound marketing. So I had a blog. I would blog every day. I would go to conferences and like type up all the notes and then write about like live blogging before it was before it was an actual thing. So really, it was inbound. It was all inbound. Until this day, we don't have an outbound department. All the business that we get right now, it's still from current client referrals or like our own inbound marketing presence.
Do you think it was easier then to sell what you were doing with essentially content on the web? Was in this area, was there just sort of more open space?
Yeah, I mean, you know what? That's totally fair. I mean, anytime I think you're kind of the first mover in a space or one of the early movers, it's easier. And I tell people all the time that even marketing today in general, especially online marketing, takes twice the effort for half the results than you did just 2 years ago. But that's true across the board, across industries, because of course competition is so fierce now.
So how did you know that this was a business and not you as the media consultant guru, like one person setting their own schedule, doing as many clients as you could handle? When did you know it was really like a business with employees?
So that's a good question. I think it was because, we quickly figured out that social media...
Wait, who's we at this point?
So me and I had one other employee.
And who was that person?
I hired a designer. We had a developer. We did like a small little team of people, like a trio, I guess, but they were handling more of the technical aspects, right? But it was so funny, and really it was client demand. We've always been driven by client demand, and it was when we realized that it wasn't just enough to consult a lot of these companies, because they would come back and say, loved it. Who's going to implement it?
Who's going to do it?
Who's going to do it? We don't have in-house resources or expertise, so they would put it back on us, and they said, listen, you did good work. Why don't you do this? And I was like, oh, okay. And I mean, really, and honestly, I resisted it for so long. I resisted going from kind of our consulting model to implementation turnkey model, because it was a lot, and I had to hire a lot more people. It was a much greater investment, and I didn't take anything home. I invested everything back in the company.
So how did you pay for those first couple employees, the designer and the developer?
So we started getting, when I was blogging and I was creating content, we started getting clients pretty quickly. I mean, people were so hungry for this information that we were in the black from day one. We never had, there was supply demand sort of equation. So yeah, we had people, and then they would tell their friends, and so very quickly, I mean, we grew. There's always more work than frankly we could handle initially.
What did your parents think of you going out and starting your own business instead of you have a master's degree from a great university? I mean, you could have taken a much more predictable, I guess, route.
I think they've known me never to be quite predictable, though. I was the kid who got into the UT Business School in McCombs. It's very prestigious.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I switched from the business school to the communications school. And I remember going to my counselor and telling her I wanted to switch, and she said, no. She was like, I want you to think about this, because she said, we have a long list of people waiting to get into the business school. Do you really want to do this? So I think I always kind of marched to the beat of my own drummer, and my parents knew that. I also think it sounded much better for them to tell their friends I was self-employed rather than unemployed. She was not looking for jobs. She's an entrepreneur. So
they warmed up to it fast.
They did. And I mean, like you said, I demand very quickly, grew very quickly, and they saw that, and they saw kind of how hard I was working at it, and they've always been really supportive. My sister and I have a younger sister. She's a yoga teacher.
I was going to ask if she worked for you at all.
Yeah, she does. She does. I hire her over the summers. She comes home from school, and she's she's super, super smart kid. But we've always been, like my family, I guess, in some ways, we've always been a little quirky.
Okay. So can you give me an example of, if you're working with a small business now, what the kind of hurdles they might be having now with social media versus when you started?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think initially it was a knowledge gap, right? What is this stuff? How do I even use it? And over time, I feel like that's gotten better, where there is a lot of knowledge out there. They understand that they need to be there. I don't do a lot of, before you do a lot of convincing, right? Here's why this is important. I feel like now they get it, because that's where their customers are. It's they understand that it's an important model. I think the challenge now becomes more a resource challenge. So we know we should do it. how do we resource for something like this? How do we not get so overwhelmed while we're doing this? And then the ROI question, right? How do I measure ROI from this?
How do you?
Here's the thing. There's a lot of great ways to measure ROI from social. I think you have to start though by realizing that it's part of a bigger puzzle. It can't just be a Facebook page or a Twitter account that you're hoping to drive direct conversions from. That's so rare. So you really do need to have it be a part of a greater marketing strategy. And once you do that, there's a quantitative way to measure and a qualitative. So it's like the academic hat being put on,
right?
Which looks like a crown.
Does it?
Which is a crown.
How convenient. Okay.
But it's but the quantitative.
Not like the Burger King crown, like a real fancy crown.
No, like the tiara crown,
okay.
right? But the quantitative are the numbers, right? Like how many leads are you getting? How many visitors? How much traffic are you getting to your site? The qualitative is what are people talking about? I mean, does your reputation precede you, and what does that look like?
Okay, all right. So you have about 30 employees now, is that right?
Yeah, we have a team of 30.
And they're dispersed, right? You're not all in like an office.
Yeah, we don't have an office at all.
So how do you manage them? Like how do they get
Whips, virtual whipping.
No, seriously, how do you manage 30 people who don't see each other on a regular basis?
Yeah, so it's really funny. So one, we hire people who don't need babysitting, right? So a lot of people who honestly work with us at Marketing Zen, they could be working at Google or Facebook or Silicon Valley or New York City. Like these are really high caliber people, but they love the flexibility. They love that they're not tethered to kind of a 9 to 5, that they don't have a commute. So we're able to attract really good people. We've got people in San Diego, in the US. And in terms of tools, even when I started like 6 years ago, oh my God, seems like such a long time now. Right? The tools were so limited, and now they've just kept growing. So before you had Skype, which obviously makes it easier, but now you have things like Sakoko, which we have a whole virtual
I don't even
office.
know what that is. Tell me what that is.
It's a virtual office.
Okay.
So if you go to Sakoko, essentially you get a virtual office setup. So you can enter people's offices, and the video live feed will come on. You can meet in the lobby. You can change room names and things like that. So it literally mimics kind of a physical office, but on the cloud you have things like Appearin, which is video meeting space. And so much of what we do, and our clientele is all over the world. We have a client in Thailand that's been one of our oldest clients. They've been with us for years now. And it never makes a difference because so much of what we do is in the digital space. There's Basecamp, obviously, for project management. There's so many great project management tools. We use Google Apps Premier extensively, so all our email systems, our entire backend is set up by Google Apps. I mean, we have so many tools these days that help us stay connected. But I think it is important, though, if you're going to go that route, that you find people who don't need to be, that you're not going to have to babysit, that have the initiative, that are really like a team made up of intrapreneurs.
Mm-hmm. So what does the idea of company culture mean in that context then?
It's an evolving question. I mean, honestly, it's something that I struggle with on a daily basis, because I think, like, are we missing out by not having, celebrating someone's birthday and bringing in cake or whatnot? But then I also think,
do you just go out and get a cupcake yourself?
I'm like,
that's what I would do.
Eating a cupcake, yeah.
Totally, I would not miss out on the cake just because I don't have an office. I would still want cake.
And it's great because in some ways, I've employees that are older, Gen X, baby boomers, and what they tell me, because I'll talk to them, I'm like, guys, are we missing the cuddly fuzzies, and we try. So when we have our weekly meetings, we always launch with kudos. So everybody gives kudos to each other for different things, different projects they may have worked on. We use another system called 15-5, one of my favorite tools right now.
Okay.
It essentially is a feedback mechanism. So every week my employees take 15 minutes to fill out what went well, what challenges are you having, how can we make things better, what's morale look like around you, and then I take 5 minutes every week to respond, which, by the way, works really well with millennial employees especially, because they love that constant feedback.
It sounds like a great tool.
It's so fantastic. So things like that help me keep a pulse on what the morale's like, how people are feeling, so they're not getting too isolated. But like I said, I was talking to my baby boomers and sort of the Gen X and people who've worked in the corporate environment, because I certainly haven't. And they'll say, Shama, you don't understand, the water cooler's great for like the chit chat, but it also breeds a lot of like political intrigue. And there's a lot, that also becomes part of that culture. And we don't have that. we don't have a lot of linear hierarchies. Everyone's opinion is valued at the same level. There's no one who has a corner office, you know. So I mean, you really don't have, like, the structure is much flatter, and so we're focused more on the work rather than kind of position or, you know, how, like, there's no snubbing or anything like that. And I work with really good people, so that helps.
Do people get frustrated that they don't see like a path to advancement, right? Because I feel like with entrepreneurial ventures, there's, you know, very often the entrepreneurs are like, you know, it's totally flat, there's no hierarchy, but then the employees are like, how do I get promoted if there's no hierarchy? Yeah. And there's no title, so nobody really knows what to do.
Yeah, so that's
how do you handle
really
those?
Good question. And I think earlier in the company, or during our beginning days, I struggled with that more, and that was more challenging. In fact, I had one employee leave who wanted that very, like, senior, what's next, I want to manage people, I want to be next in that ladder. So a couple of things that we've done, I think, in terms of what we do, right, by the nature of what we do, the integrated digital marketing, there's a lot of overlap. The team has to work together. So in some ways, titles actually keep us from doing that. It's like, this is content, I don't do social, or I'm search. No, I mean, to get results with online marketing, all of that has to merge. So that being said, the flip side to being a company like ours is that we have a lot of creativity and no red tape really for what someone wants to create. And I'll give you an example. I have an employee right now who's doing really good work as part of a specific team, but as his interest and expertise grows, he has come to me and we're talking about creating a whole separate department now based on his interest in multimedia and so forth.
Interesting.
So, and that's great, and we can do that because it's not like, well, there's no next title for you, right? But in terms of the work you want to do, and like, I don't care, call yourself king of, we don't get focused on that, but I think in those ways, if you bring something to the table, you really have the option of doing something with that, and I've learned to see that as an advantage.
So you coming into this, when you had a great head start because you were interested in and like really studying and picking apart social media before other people realized what was going on, but you dropped out of business school. So how did you learn about the business side of this, right? Because it's not just the social media expertise, or you would still be in academia.
Yeah, it's funny. So a lot of it was hands-on learning, you know, and I worked with a lot of mentors. I worked with Robert Middleton, who's really big in the marketing field. I took a course with him. I'm a voracious reader. I've always been. I mean, so a lot of it was me picking out books and reading. And even the business school thing, it's so funny because people are probably wondering why I did make that switch. It was honestly because I didn't want to take calculus. Like, I had no other reason, but the business school
I think that drives a lot of academic decisions.
It
no
calculus. Calculus, 2 years of it, or like 2 semesters, and communication didn't. And I could still take a lot of the business classes I wanted to without having to do that.
Calculus.
I thought, you know, I'm going to have a miserable experience, and I don't want to do that to myself. Like, I'm not a masochist, so I was like, you know what, I'm just going to enjoy my experience. And then I ended up taking courses, MBA courses as well, at UT as part of my master's program, so it worked out well.
So can you give me maybe 3 examples of things that you've learned being an entrepreneur that you think would be helpful for other people who are just starting their journey of entrepreneurship to know about?
Yeah. So I think the first I'll start with sort of a more philosophical one, which is you have to enjoy the journey of being an entrepreneur. And this is something, again, like as I talk to you, these are things I struggle with on a daily basis. So by no means am I speaking from my, again, placing the crown and sort of this high point. It's this idea of, like, you know, the goal's always moving. And I think as entrepreneurs, we have to be very cognizant of that and realize that there'll always be something else that you want. You know, when you hit $1 million in revenue, how long do you think it takes before you enjoy that and say, now we got to get to $5 million in revenue? You know, that marker's moving.
That would be another moment for
So I think you have to enjoy that journey, and otherwise it's not worth it. The second thing I've learned is everything is an evolution. You have to be willing to adapt an idea. The best idea is really, I mean, if you think about YouTube, right? It started as a dating app. Like, they thought it would be neat if people were able to put up videos of themselves talking.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and connecting. And then they were at an event, the founders, and they met someone else, and they were like, why don't you just let people upload whatever? Like, so it's, so many ideas are an evolution of themselves. If you look at Facebook, right? I don't think that it was ever set up as it's going to be this global tech company. Like, it started out very basic, like letting people connect with each other on the specific college campus.
Right.
And then, of course, it evolved into it is what it is today. So I think as an entrepreneur, you have to be willing to let things evolve and go with that. The third thing I'll say is almost from a marketing perspective, right? There's this sense of overwhelm that I think a lot of people feel.
Yes.
Especially with social media and in regards to the new tools. And I always tell people, start with your business goals first and realize that you have so many options that will help you accomplish what you're trying to do rather than chasing the next new thing and seeing how it fits into your plan.
Got it.
So that's my
That's helpful.
top three.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about your work with clients.
Okay.
Now, when entrepreneurs come to you for social media help, are there certain mistakes that they make over and over and over that you would like to save them from, that we can maybe save some from right now?
Now. I'll say a couple of things. I mean, when clients come to us for digital marketing, I'll say for about 80% of our clients, we are their web marketing department. We handle everything turnkey from them, from their site.
So they've just outsourced the whole thing, like
exactly,
you do it.
Yeah, and that's fine. You focus on certain elements of the business, and that works. I think for a lot of like business owners, it's not so much that they're making dumb mistakes, like when early days, right, where it was like I don't know how to use these tools. It's a lack of consistency and a very haphazard approach to marketing and specifically social media, and then they're frustrated because they're not seeing the results of it. So it's hard because you send out a newsletter, like this is so common. I'll get a call and someone's like, yeah, we sent out a newsletter a couple of months ago, but I'm not really sure whatever happened to that. Hey Bob, get in here, get in the office, like whatever happened to that? Didn't we purchase a system to do that? And then I'll say, what about content? They'll be like, well, whenever Amy in the back office has a chance, there's always an Amy in the back office, right? We push out a blog post here and there, but there's no consistency in that. Same thing with anything across the board marketing. I think it kind of gets like a little here, a little there, but that's not what it takes these days. It takes so much more. And to give you a very simple example, when blogging started, right? We tell clients, hey, blog once a week if you can. That's great. Now, if you're actually using it for search engine purposes or traffic, it's just not enough. So if you're not like writing 2,000 word articles and really, you have to invest those time and resources because you're going to get that return, but you're working in a very competitive landscape, so you have to get more creative.
That's a lot of effort. That's a lot of effort.
It is a lot of effort.
Yeah. So we have a couple questions from Twitter that I wanted to ask you. One is from our own social media editor, who's Stephanie Myers. She has a little different twist on this.
Not to be confused with the Twilight author.
Sometimes, but not to be. Absolutely not to be. That is...
Okay.
I don't know the other Stephanie Myers, but ours is superior in the world of Stephanie Myers, I'm sure.
I'll believe you.
So what is the biggest mistake that you see brands make? Like, what are the faux pas that you see on Twitter that just grate you the most?
I think especially bigger brands, it's funny. It's this idea of newsjacking, right? Or like, take an event and see how you can tie your brand into it. And I think when done correctly, it can be very successful. But it is annoying when brands will do anything and kind of force fit their messages. When it has like nothing to, if it's not a natural fit, don't force it. I think it's just something brands have to be really cognizant about because the media world, it'll bite back. I mean, we've seen that in recent months and years where brands will do something and people will say, we'll call foul on it. So
okay, that's a good example. We've written a bit and I think spoken a bit about there's so many social media platforms out there. So how, as a business owner, do you know which ones to pay attention to and to devote energy to? Because not only are there many out there, but there will be many more, right?
Absolutely.
So it seems like a never-ending kind of problem.
Right. So this ties into just what we were speaking earlier about in terms of start with your business goals. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And then where's your audience? Those are really the two things. I mean, if you're a really visual business, Instagram, Tumblr, if you have a younger audience, your platforms are going to differ. If you're a B2B business, LinkedIn and Twitter should be your best friend. Twitter is one of those rare platforms that I think there's a lot of overlap with. Facebook's great for more B2C brands, and B2B, when we work with clients, we use that more sort of showcasing the company culture or better for recruitment purposes. But, LinkedIn is sort of a dark horse to watch.
Why is that?
Well, LinkedIn recently acquired lynda.com, right? So I think they're a dark horse because they're doing a great job becoming the go-to source for professionals. So it's going more than just networking to now skill, right? To
Right, with
skills,
Linda.
to skill, right? To acquiring those skills, to like. So now my entire kind of professional. So if you think about Facebook and you think about it as sort of my personal life, my personal digital timeline, LinkedIn almost becomes your professional digital timeline to some degree. What courses have you taken? And it all kind of ties in to this sort of portfolio, if you will, of your career.
So how then does LinkedIn work for a brand?
So LinkedIn has a lot of great opportunities. With brands, where company pages obviously are a great one. I think you should always try to get traffic back to your site so you can convert and measure. But for example, with some of our B2B clients, when we do webinars for them, we promote heavily on LinkedIn. Another client of ours, and so many times I think companies forget their best resource is internally, their employees and their teams. So we started an internal newsletter for their employees. So we were creating all this content for this client. We would send out this Tuesday newsletter that said, here's what you can share on LinkedIn. And so we'd have status updates and links, and then that made it so easy because people were now coming across helpful and professional and using the tool, but they weren't necessarily having to sit there and figure out what they wanted to share. So really made it easy for them. We saw traffic go up 30% in the first month.
Fantastic. So we have another Twitter user who has a question for us. Her name is Kate Marie.
Hi,
and
Kate.
she asks, where should nonprofits with small marketing budgets focus their efforts to get the most bang for the buck?
Yeah, so good question.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one, but you have to, it depends on your nonprofit, right? It depends on your nonprofit. You have to get creative. That's for sure. It needs a lot of creativity and understand why people use social media, right? It's rarely, I think nonprofits have an edge in that way because why people use social networking, so many times it's to showcase their own identity. So I'm much more likely, for example, to like a page about puppies and than I am about some corporation, right? And because liking the puppies page says something about me. And so I think nonprofits in that way have an edge because people want to be associated with that. But you look at, for example, the ALS,
the Ice Bucket Challenge, right?
And it's amazing because they got that principle about we have to make it about the people. What do we allow people to say about themselves as it relates to our brand? So something I tell all companies, nonprofits and for-profits is, the old school thinking was, what's our brand say about us? Like, what is our brand, right? It's very Mad Men era-esque and it's carried over. The new way to think about is for individuals who are interacting, what does it allow themselves to say about them as they interact with our brand?
Interesting.
Right? How is that reflective of them? So what does our brand allow them to say about themselves? And it's a very different twist on sort of, like old school methodology, here's our brand, versus if I engage with this brand, if I'm, for example, a reader of Inc. magazine or I'm watching this live chat right now, it's so much more, what does it say about me that I'm engaging rather than what is the Inc. magazine brand?
And then how do you sort of leverage that as a brand or as an entrepreneur? Like once you figure that out, then how do you move forward?
I mean, some good examples are like that Ice Bucket Challenge, right?
Right.
We have another client that we're doing with.
But what was let's stick with the Ice Bucket Challenge because I think most people know it and it was brilliant, right? So before, let's just be hypothetical, they launched the Ice Bucket Challenge.
Right.
What were they thinking that people wanted to say about themselves by dumping a bucket of ice water?
Right.
On
So
their
I think
heads?
the Ice Bucket thing it's funny, but it was what do we want to get accomplished, right? So we want to get the word out about ALS and increase awareness of this. What can we do so we allow people to engage with it in a way that's interactive, in a way that's going to be easy? So not very hard to dump. In some ways, I guess it is, but really, like, we can all access a bucket of ice, and and also has kind of that ethos effect, and that's always a nice little plus, right? Now, there's another example of Pandora, the jewelry line. Have you seen that video?
I don't think so.
It's interesting because they have these little kids, and they've got moms lined up, and they've all wearing Pandora jewelry, but they blindfold the little kids, and they let them touch each woman kind of, with her hair and hands and try to figure out who's their mom, and they're able to make that connection, right? So it's the same element of like, how can you evoke certain emotions? How can you still tell a good story? How can you engage the person fully as much as you can. And with nonprofits, back to that question, it's so much easier to do than even with for-profit companies.
Interesting. I'm sure a lot of nonprofits don't necessarily feel that way.
It's challenging. I mean, that's just the truth. That's the landscape today for everybody. But we work with a nonprofit called Texas Alliance of Homeless Pets. And we've had like some staggering success with it, even though it's a smaller nonprofit, because people love getting engaged with that sort of thing. They want to support. We get so many shares because people want to help poor little Johnny find a home, and I feel like at the end of the day, it's still about connecting with people's emotions, especially when it comes to nonprofits.
So one of the things that I want to ask you is, with entrepreneurs, very often they themselves are nearly synonymous with their companies. So one of the things that either they or their PR people try to do is position themselves as like a thought leader in their industry, right? What works with this and what doesn't, from what you've seen? Like, what is like the smart way to go about this, and what is like the blowhard way to do it? And hopefully fair. They're not the same.
They're not. And I think I'll say this, there's a lot to be said for that strategy of building up your personal brand, because the truth is people will engage with an individual faster than they will a company, right? Especially for companies that consider themselves to be in a boring, quote-unquote, industry, or a lot of B2B companies where they're like, it's really our expertise that people want, or how do we brand ourselves? And if you have a leader who's willing to be transparent and willing to be out there, I think it's a great, absolutely, you should leverage everything your company has to offer, including your leadership and your executives at that level. I think what goes a long way is when there is real buy-in from the top, where it's not someone saying, hey, we got to get you out there more,
right?
But someone saying, no, I understand the value in this, that I'm going to be a more engaged leader here, right? There's a great, Charlene Lee has a book out called Engaged Leadership, and it's great because it's about how executives engage from that level.
Could you just repeat the name of the author again?
Charlene Lee.
Okay.
L-I, and I believe the book is called Engaged Leadership. And it's a great book. I have it on my Kindle right now. But it's this idea of getting leaders and executives in the C-suite understanding how important it is for them to connect with the audience, to create a sense of transparency, and not sort of that fake, like, sure, I have someone ghostwriting 1 or 2 articles for us a month, and yes, I like the people.
right, there's a lot of that though, right, yeah.
But so I think that's kind of what you mentioned, the blowhard way to do it, where it is very strictly strategic. But I think when you come from a perspective of, no, there is authentic leadership, and how do we add transparency to it, then everything really changes. But yeah, I think by all means, leaders at the top should be looking at how they can create content. I've talked about social literacy and how that's really going to be sort of the next skill set required by leaders in corporations at a personal level. Can you create content? Can you curate it? Are you able to make decisions based on aggregate levels of information at an organizational level? How agile are you? How quickly are you able to adapt? How quickly are you able to get information again from multiple sources and make good decisions based on that? And this is a certain type of literacy that I think we're just beginning to sort of uncover and learn about.
I feel that this is a very interesting trend that you've brought up, but I feel that it's maybe only at the more entrepreneurial companies where that's getting baked into the CEO's role. I feel like that's something that people still feel they can delegate to Marcom.
Yeah, but I think that's slowly changing. It's funny because just in the last few months, I've talked to so many companies, a handful, but enough to have me raise a brow, who are setting up millennial advisory panels within kind of they have their traditional board of directors, and they have a millennial because they want to engage at that level, or they're really curious to learn what that looks like. And I think also because they're learning that it's not something that can be delegated just to Marcom. I mean, certainly activities and tactics can, because no one's expecting someone to add hours to their schedule, but I think that understanding and willingness and understanding the impact of that really does need to come from the top.
So you mentioned that you need to have authentic leadership and then you add transparency, right? But one of the issues with transparency is how personal should you be online, right? Sure. You have a huge digital footprint, right? So how do you decide, this is my professional persona, but I have to be approachable and authentic and human for people to sort of hook into that. So do I tell them about my personal life? Do I tell them what I had for breakfast?
Yeah.
How do you navigate that?
That's a really good question. And, you know, for me, I feel like the bottom line is always, does this add value in any way to the people, right, that I'm talking to? So you'll see that even though I walk that professional personal line, rarely do I put pictures of me like, you know, this is what I had for breakfast, or check out this meal. Like, that might make up a 1/100th of what I share, because at the end of the day, for me, it was so funny, because we were out visiting clients from Orlando and my employees, and we had this meal, and they were doing the same thing. They were Instagramming all their food, and they're like, Shama, don't you want to Instagram the food? And I said, guys, do you think that anybody like wants to see pictures of food? Like, maybe they do, and I like maybe there's a whole foodie clan that I'm just oblivious to, and I'm a foodie myself. But I thought, you know, anytime I share something, I think, is there value here? So even if I say, hey guys, just finished speaking at this event, I'll share something that I thought was particularly interesting from that event, or a question that I got. So everything that I share, I try to ask myself before I do, like, is this providing value? Did this help anybody's kind of day get easier in some way? Or is it just, like, I've never been a fan of adding to the noise on the internet, and I certainly never want to be the cause of that. Never intentionally. And I think the only thing that I am guilty of sometimes is I'm a dog lover. I love my dog Snoopy, and so he pulls on my heartstrings, and so I will grant you that there's pictures of Snoops, but you know, people really seem to like that too. So it's like, more people wish Snoopy happy birthday, than they do a lot of individuals. So, but I think that's the question to ask yourself, is how is this adding value to a reader?
That's a great guideline. I think that's going to be really helpful. So we're almost out of time. Before we go, I just want to check in with you. Is there like one piece of advice on social media marketing that you know you want to close with? That's really
one
important.
piece of advice. I will say it's probably like the least sexy piece of advice.
Go for it.
I always call it. It's like consistency. Consistency. Like, it's not sexy because it's not the next tool, and it's not Periscope this, or, you know, it's not anything exciting, but that's really how you drive business results. Right?
Does that sometimes mean doing less?
Sometimes doing less and more focused, right? So if you decide we don't have a lot of resources, but maybe we're going to do one newsletter a month, and we're going to make it really good, and we're going to make sure that it goes out every month, then do that. Focus on the things that you feel are providing the most value. Tweak them, make them better, and do them consistently. You know, Kimberly, it's funny. We've had people who come work with us, and then I'm like, great, where did you hear about us? And it's not rare for them to say, oh, you know, I've been getting your newsletter for 2 years. And I'm blown away, because I'm like, 2 years? And they're like, oh, we always knew, you know, one day we'd work with you guys, you just weren't there, we're doing other things. And you just don't realize that, because I think when you're doing it as an entrepreneur, it's your business, you're so focused on, like, you know, it's very easy to see, like, get lost in the forest or in the trees, and you're like, is anybody out there?
Right.
Is anybody listening? But yeah, I think that the trick is really consistency in marketing, social media or otherwise.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you very much. Please join us tomorrow at noon Eastern Time, when we'll be speaking with Joe Coleman. He is the co-founder of Contently. Thank you so much.